Welcome to a special episode of the Operator Signal. Today, I am joined by JD Brem. He is founder and principal of Brem Enterprises. JD, thank you for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about the company.
Thanks for having me, James. Um, I've spent the better part of 15 years in manufacturing finance. Through few different PE shuffles, I kind of got to experience a few different portcos, different IT sides of the finance coin. Normally, I'm in the operator seat where you're partnering with the GM or the VP of Ops. How do you build the business? So where my focus is how do we get in there and help you guys see what you can see? My favorite part is when we're going in the smaller end of the scale. Where businesses are growing, because there's times that you can handle things when you're small because it's like a marble rolling downhill versus it's a boulder when you get some size and scale behind you.
Absolutely. So, today we're talking about Fort Worth, how it's growing, some of the hidden pressures that are emerging in the manufacturing distribution sectors. So, let's get into that. First question. So, Fort Worth is seeing real momentum around manufacturing industrial growth, like I said. From your perspective, what kinds of companies are benefiting from that growth and where are they starting to feel pressure?
So, I mean, growth can come in many different flavors, right? If you're not at the right cost position, if you're not in the right revenue position, it becomes a problem. So you have to start looking at where am I at? The pressure can be, do I have to invest in more inventory and do I have the cash to do it? Do I have the capacity to do it? Where we're seeing it is predominantly the smaller end of the scale to the mid-sized firms that may or may not have a private equity partner ready to invest with them. That's where you have to really leverage those relationships with bankers and make sure you have a good case for what you're going to go chase.
For sure. So, a lot of people think growth automatically means a company is healthy, right? Where do you see growth actually creating stress inside a manufacturing or distribution business?
Um, it can come in many places. If you are already up at the top of your capacity abilities, you have to start saying, how do I do more with less? So you either become more efficient in using those lean tools that we all kind of talk about. There's ways to apply them and get more out of it. There's other ways of saying, hey, how do I expand the facility, which becomes a full-time job in and of itself. The last way, which is the most dangerous, is if you've not adequately accounted for what your operating costs are and not got the right agreements with your customers. If it becomes unprofitable growth, you just start digging a hole you can't get yourself out of. If you're not leveraging your variable costs as you should be, you get to be in a position that the economics don't work in your favor. So if you're already in a losing position now and it's only a small piece of your business, if that's the piece that grows, that becomes the problem. And that's where you have to start digging into saying, hey, is the growth what I actually want? If it's not what you want to be growing in, that becomes a danger. And many times I've run into places, for instance, I was in a thin film med device plant where we had to have an honest conversation about how does our labor productivity look, because we had this disproportionate scale where we felt like we needed to add people when in reality you had kind of a gift as volume went up. You had to staff the plant no matter what. There was a break even point. But once you went over that, you disproportionately got volume through the plant versus what the labor component was. The piece behind that was also the material side. You have to control your materials. That's one of the two usually highest cost items you have in a manufacturing event. In a distribution event, you have to make sure, hey, I'm not destroying things. The faster we try to push people on fork trucks, the more often that they shove a fork through something, and that something can be a $5 bucket or it can be a couple $1,000 air conditioner from my experience. You have to be very focused and diligent about, we do not apply the pressure where we don't need to apply the pressure, but we do keep ourselves consistent and diligent about the way we look at things and the way we manage our staff.
So, I just kind of want to separate two words here. There's growth and then there's scale. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this, your commentary. But I always like to separate the two, where growth is where everything grows, like your revenue goes up, your expenses go up. But then scale is where your revenue might go up, but your expenses don't. What's your thought around that? And give us some commentary, if you will, about how there could be a difference between growth and scale and what it means as far as having a healthy company and kind of some of those points that you just made.
So you're right. Everyone assumes as you grow, it's easy to scale everything. And the truth is that volume cures almost all sins. I heard that a long time ago in my career, and I've yet to be able to break it. Where it doesn't cure sins is when
Yep.
you are not diligent about, you have to remember there's only a certain amount of cash in any business you're in. You have to be judicious in how you apply it. You must be careful and say, all right, look, we're going to grow, but we're going to do it in the right way. Because if we start throwing caution to the wind and say, hey, look, I'm going to grow at all costs, that's awesome for a small business that is well capitalized and can afford to really push the growth button. If you're not in that position and you say, hey, I need this to pay for the next level of my business, you have to say, all right, if I'm going from say 2 shifts to 3 shifts and I'm running a factory 24/5 or 24/7, there's additional operating cost that comes with that, but you also have to make sure third shift, at times when you're ramping that third shift, it's inefficient. There's always those costs you have to think through. And those are true cash out expenses that, depending upon your conversion cycle, it can be 30, 60, 90 days before you see the cash come back. So it's where it kind of all comes full circle of, yeah, we don't talk about the bank account, but we always end up back at the bank account where we talk about what can you afford. But getting back to your conversation of expenses growing, I mean, there's ones that will grow and they need to be planned for, but the ones that don't need to grow, you have to hold yourself accountable and say, okay, if I have 3 shifts, do I truly need 6 supervisors? Well, if I'm a small plant, the answer is probably not. If I'm in a larger plant and I need to be more specific about how I manage and how I hit my tasks to ensure that things are aligned, then yeah, you probably do. It just comes down to a case by case partnering situation where you make sure you align on what those growth metrics and objectives are.
Very good. Um, I think that kind of can swing into our next question is what are some of the financial or operational warning signs that a company is outgrowing its current back office structure?
So that can come in many different flavors. Um, From a back office perspective, you can be talking about everything from production planning, order fulfillment to, yes, the true invoicing, cash collection. The in finance usually touches different pieces. Where you see a lot of it breaking is there's times, like I mentioned, it all ends with the checking account of saying, hey, can we afford this? That first time you get there and say, oops, we accidentally overdrew, or oh, we have no idea. That's where it becomes a bit of a problem of saying, hey, how are we funding the business? How are we doing this? I've seen several places that grow and they grow unprofitably, for lack of a better term, because they feel like being busy is the answer. And yes, being busy is the answer, but you have to be very specifically busy and make sure you're driving in the right direction. A lot of examples you'll see in finances, like I said, the cash, but also when, leadership team doesn't understand exactly where you're making your money. Um, Finance to me is a customer service function. How do I service the other functions and make sure they have the tools they need to make the decisions that they have to make? And without the data in front of them, they're going off of their gut, which most of the time is in the right direction. It just may not actually be the right calculator math to get you where you need to go.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And so for owner led manufacturing companies out there, and you kind of touched on this a moment ago, what tends to break first when demand increases? Is it cash flow? Is it reporting? Is it people or systems or something else?
It really depends on which one you're in. I've seen situations where cash can get you into a bind. That's the one that you normally hear about because that's the one that freaks most people out. But reporting wise, you can have plant managers, owners, whatnot, walking around out there saying, hey, yeah, I had a banner month. Well, wait a minute. Yeah, you shipped more. But let's be honest about what it took you to ship more because you didn't streamline your process to get there. And it's nothing bad or rude about where you are. It's just, hey, we pushed to get to the next level, but we didn't have the systems and support to put us there. So that's where we can kind of circle back to that growth conversation of, hey, we grew, we made it, but how much overtime did we use to go get it? How much, human capital did we expend that if we would have been a little bit carefuler about this, like if we would have controlled our scrap better, we wouldn't have had to work as many hours because every time you throw a unit out, that's labor hours you could have been building a good one with. So you'll usually see, hey, people start running the business off of gut feel because they don't have visibility. It becomes a reporting and a understanding. So the back office has to speed up just as much as the production area, if you will, but you don't really speed it up by going faster. You speed it up by putting the processes and systems in place that allow you to say, hey, it doesn't matter how fast or how slow that out there goes. We're going to have this consistent process we follow. And that process cannot be rigid. It has to be flexible enough to move and shift with the business because there's no business on the planet that I can guarantee you. Every Monday I give you this, I'm going to solve all your problems. There's always going to be a Wednesday or a Thursday conversation that gets to follow.
That's a good point. I like that. So, okay, can you walk us through a case study or an example where a company had demand or opportunity in front of it, but needed stronger accounting or compliance or maybe financial visibility to manage that growth properly?
Yep. So a few years ago, I was working in a plastic bottle manufacturing organization that had about 10 different plants. We were expanding down here in the Texas area in Mansfield specifically. And what happened is the growth plan did not fully account for as much labor as we needed. So this is where you can talk about, hey, it works on the spreadsheet, but it doesn't work on the floor. Well, what happens is we threw some more labor at it, and suddenly that plant became more unprofitable and became the center of everybody's focus, right? We had to sit down and have a conversation with the regional ops manager, and we worked through what those labor metrics were. We worked through what the differences are so we could get somewhere between where we were supposed to be and where we really are. Um, there was a lot of focus and a lot of attention paid to, okay, let's get weekly reviews out there. Let's get the metrics in front of them. Let's try to make them more timely. Um, because a lot of businesses try to run on, hey, the monthly close can tell me everything I know. The reality is, by the time you get it, the oldest piece of those data are usually 45 to 60 days old. How can you run a business when you're 2 months in arrears? I mean, what's happening today is what has to drive what decisions you make. So you have to know what those levers are. And if you go back to my example with a med device factory, you had to know every day how our labor productivity was going because material and labor told the story on that plant. And if you weren't controlling how much material you were driving because of scrap or because someone didn't pay attention to what the machine was telling them, you would end up in a situation where you couldn't put in full poke yoke. So you had to train and be very diligent in how those appearances went out.
I think something like that would also be very relevant to owner operators that are either looking for financing or maybe looking to exit their company. What do you think?
That's where the saying, the proof is in the pudding, that's where it comes through. Like if you're thinking of selling in the next few years, now is the time to have those conversations because your last 3 year financials end up in what they call your Q of E data book that kind of starts a lot of those, teaser books and whatnot. This is the time to get all of that together if you're looking at having that. Because the other piece of purchasing a business is not just what do you make, it's how sustainable and how likely is it to run with or without you. Have a friend of mine who purchased a business and he went through the process of having to learn all of the processes, finding out how to run the business without the founder. Now I know he's got processes in there, but his comment after is, I probably would have knocked the price a little bit, knowing how much we were going to have to go through pain.
Yeah. Yeah, that's typically what it is, and that's why sellers can't get the prices they're looking for. But we'll save that for another conversation. All
Yeah.
right, last question. If a manufacturer or distributor in Fort Worth is is growing right now, what should the owner or the leadership team be paying closer attention to before the business hits a constraint?
So usually what I say is if you're already in the growth phase, we're a little bit behind the curve, but we can catch you back up. It's not terrible to play catch up. It's a focus on, are we servicing the customers at the right pace at what they're asking for? Are we serving one too much? Because customer concentration can become a conversation in there for a little bit of risk. Like if you're growing and it's only one customer that's growing and now suddenly they're 50% of your business, you might need to pay a little bit of attention because if you make them unhappy or something changes, that's a pretty hard adjustment to your P&L if all or some of it disappears. The next piece is your cash conversion cycle. How early are you putting dollars into inventory and how long is it taking for you to get them back out? Because that's essentially what you either have to fund the business or borrow to run the business, right? Um, you need to understand your margin by customer, by job, as deep as it can be. The big piece there is you have to meet the business where they are. Everyone likes to go become complicated and complex, and not every business needs that. A lot of people respond by saying, oh, well, you need a system, you need an ERP, you need a something. If the business isn't natively ready for that, there are ways to work around and kind of do some manual processes in the interim as you learn how to do those things. Best in class is to put in some form of a system, but there's a lot of smaller businesses that just aren't willing to expend the human capital because a system's only as good as what you put in. So if you don't have the time or the desire to put that data in, it's not going to help you. It's easier to kind of, work around it and find ways to use what you have. A lot of the tools we have can give us information. We just may not quite understand that there's a secret button in the back we can use. And then the last piece I would say is actually looking at your cash forecast and being honest about what it is. Be honest about what your growth is so that you know that, hey, if I'm investing in inventory and this doesn't take off, I have a problem for, X number of days that it's going to take for me to bleed this off. Because let's say I planned on a customer to grow gangbusters, they didn't do it. If I put $1 million in inventory and I planned on it to come back in 2 months, well, if the customer doesn't buy it like I planned it, it takes 4 months. What does that mean to be able to fund payroll, to fund AP, to fund all these different things?
Yep, for sure. JD, I appreciate your insights on this, and I appreciate you spending some time with us today on this this episode of the Operator Signal. For those watching, we are actually going to have a follow up session where we're going to be talking about not just the growth and the pressures, but how to grow from the growth phase into being actually financeable and kind of building that back office before you need it. So please do tune in to catch that second piece. JD, thank you for your insights today. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.